Former anti-vaxxers, what caused you to change your mind? I'll give you an historical one. In 1736 I lost one of my sons, a fine boy of 4 years old, by the smallpox, taken in the common way. I long regretted bitterly, and still regret that I had not given it to him by inoculation. This I mention for the sake of parents who omit that operation, on the supposition that they should never forgive themselves if a child died under it, my example showing that the regret may be the same either way and that, therefore, the safer should be chosen. Benjamin Franklin. My mum told me last week when we were talking about a COVID-19 vaccine that she nearly didn't have my brother and I vaccinated. I was shocked, because she was a nurse for years and years, and she now stresses the importance of getting our yearly flu vaccinations and pushes my needle-phobic dad to get his. Basically, when she was doing her nurse training back in the early 70s, she did a few weeks on the only ward in the country at the time for people with profound and multiple disabilities, PMLD. The majority were born with PMLD or had them as a result of oxygen deprivation at birth, but she was told that a handful of them developed them following vaccine injury. Not sure if this is a medically accepted term, but those are the words she used, from a single bad batch of vaccines for measles and rubella, I think. By the time my brother and I were born in 1988 and 1990, she was still affected by what she'd seen back in the 70s. And although she'd seen the progress in vaccinations and there were no more reports of these bad batches of vaccines, she didn't allow them to give us our first vaccine doses on time. It wasn't until my aunt, also a trained nurse, showed her the latest stats and research about vaccines that she reluctantly decided to have us vaccinated. I was 1 year old at the time and scheduled for the MMR jab. It was the Mr. vaccine that she was told caused these vaccine injuries, and she was very reluctant to go ahead with it, but ultimately agreed that both my brother, 2.5 at the time, needed to catch up on all our vaccines. She didn't take us to get them. She sent my dad instead again, needle phobic, and he and I apparently cried the whole time. She told me that she'd glad she decided for us to get the vaccines as we've been mostly healthy since then, and if it hadn't been for our aunt we might not have ever been vaccinated. When I was in medical school, my pediatrics inpatient rotation had several children with very sad, confirmed, genetic disorders, but their parents said the diseases were due to vaccination, not genetics. It was wild. I was just a medical student, but I was pretty sure that a vaccination after birth won't cause genetic changes back in time to conception. I was a teenager and used to believe that if I got sick, my immune system would handle it and make me stronger. Like most youth, I believed I was invulnerable. I figured thousands of years of ancestors had survived without vaccines, and so could I. It was years before I realized that before vaccines, people didn't just heal the viruses away, most of them died or were crippled by illness their whole lives. My great-great-aunt got polio at the age of 16, about 1906, and was paralyzed from the waist down. She became wheelchair-bound, and wheelchairs back then looked like torture devices. She lived to 100 and died around 1990. I can't imagine 84 years of life in a wheelchair. She married, no kids, but how she kept her mind together I'll never know. It's amazing what polio can do to her body. My grandmother's aunt, so I guess my great-aunt, great-great-aunt? Not sure, had polio when she was a little girl. She was luckier than your aunt. She recovered enough to walk and have kids. But it did some serious lifelong damage to her body. She only reached 4 feet 6 inches in height and one of her legs was much smaller than the other. By much smaller I mean to get shoes she would buy 2 identical pairs, one to get her larger size left shoe and her smaller size right shoe. There was also about a 2-inch length difference in her legs, which obviously made her walk really oddly. She had this boot thing she could put her shoe in that would even out her height. If she was wearing a dress or going out in public she would wear that. Around the house though she wouldn't. I don't really know why I didn't like the idea of vaccines, but I didn't until my girlfriend had gotten pregnant and then I stepped on a rusty nail. Like the only way to stop tetanus is the vaccine. My now wife was an anti-vaxxer. I generally go with what she says most of the time, because I cannot be bothered to argue. However, when we were discussing getting married and having kids, I was surprised at how strongly I felt about. I was prepared to walk away from the love of my life rather than not vaccinate. I gave all of the reasons. I'm from a third world country and she is European. I have seen too much it from a lack of vaccination program to sit on the fence on this. She came around. When our first was born, he was quite ill. I don't think we were in danger of losing him, but just that tiny bit of danger reiterated the point of protecting them and others from illnesses. My wife is now more on top of the vaccination dates for our kids than I am. A friend of hers had a baby recently and expressed some anti-vaccination sentiments. My wife calmly told her that not only would she be putting her own kids in danger, but that she would be weaponizing her child against others. Quite a turnaround. Interesting how a lot of the stories here are related to not knowing how deadly these diseases are. How many need to die for people to learn. It's pretty commonly accepted in public health circles that, unless there's a mass outbreak of a communicable disease that is potentially fatal, you'll get anti-vaxxers. I hope that the COVID-19 vaccine will stomp out the movement for a while, but seeing as how you have roughly 10-20% of people saying they won't wear masks, I'm not holding my breath on this one. This may seem anecdotal, but I've noticed an increase in anti-vaccines rhetoric on Instagram and Twitter since the pandemic. People are posting about how vaccines are just a way to control us, etc. A lot of influencers are flogging the whole do your own research. That, do your own research, is code for 5G causes COVID-19 and vaccinations are evil. Kind of boring, but I have a whack job grandmother who believes in all the pseudoscience health BS. Crystal healing, electromagnetic communications cause cancer, vaccines are bad, eat apricot pits to cure cancer, the whole 9 miles. When I was a kid she tried to teach me all of this stuff like it was gospel, and I believed her, because I was a kid and why would my grandmom be wrong about something? Unfortunately for her, the minute I turned like 7, I got a huge hyperfixation on biology and quickly learned that all the stuff she spouted was utter BS. I'm autistic, and I was like the stereotypical autistic kid where they just know a frickin' about one particular subject and devour any kind of learning material related to it they can get their hands on. I'm actually still like that. Except now I can get a degree for it. It was not hard for me to realize that none of the things she believed made any sense, even as a kid. My ex-husband was a very controlling person and did not want our kids to get vaccines. I was always so scared knowing my kids had no protection. One day one of our kids scraped themselves on a fence and the school called me. I snapped and took them straight to an urgent care for a tetanus shot and just started secretly getting all my kids vaccines. We eventually divorced and now all my kids are fully caught up. I met my Mill, who is the ultimate anti-vaxxer, and realized how freaking crazy she sounds, and I didn't want to end up like, that. Also, I have a baby daughter who I would like to live a long healthy life. Not me, but my cousin. She was extremely anti-vax for most of her life, and she refused to vaccinate her kids when they were born. Her second baby caught whooping cough, passed it to her first kid, and they both almost died. According to her, nearly losing her kids made her realize that she was an idiot for not vaccinating them. I am allergic to the vaccine for whooping cough and I caught it when I moved states. As a then 23-year-old man, I thought I was going to die from it. You don't just vaccinate to protect yourself, you do it to protect others. This right here. If you're not vaccinated for legitimate reasons like this, you have to depend on herd immunity, and people who are refusing to vaccinate themselves or their children are putting everyone who cannot get vaccines at an unnecessary amount of risk. I am considered high risk for live vaccines, like MMR, however had to have it recently because of the number of cases of measles from idiots not vaccinating. I was not particularly pleased that I had to take a pretty big risk of being seriously ill, because people want their kids to die of preventable illnesses. If you ever wonder why the ratio of stupid people to normal people is constant, It's because they take out normal people along with themselves. Not me, but my nonna. She's always been into oils, healing rocks, potatoes and socks, all that weird it. When I was sick, she would give me a bath and run her hand right above my skin, from head to toe, to draw out the sickness. When my youngest cousin was born, she practically moved into my aunt's house and went everywhere with them. When she took him to get his shots, my nonna started fussing with the pediatrician and he just talked. All he did was explain it to her, and she finally understood how batty she sounded. She still firmly believes that my cat is gonna steal my firstborn's breath, but we're working on it. Your cat is gonna what? It's an old wives' tale. Cats like to snuggle warm things. Babies are warm and my size as a pillow. Emma just sit on its chest with my face facing their face. Baby can't breathe with 2 kilograms weight on chest. Gets into trouble, dies because of cat. People think it's because kitty stole the breath out of them with their mouth, not they're too heavy for baby's chest. Anyone who owns a cat knows the cat always sleeps with their butt to your face anyway. LOL, not always. I used to have a cat who would sleep on my chest while I was sleeping on my back. When I woke up we would be face to face and she was staring me down. It was terrifying at first, LMAO.